Okay, so it's 12:05 on the dot. We can start our conversation. And I'm an entrepreneurship associate at Bongo Hive. So today's session is actually the third session and last session out of a three-part webinar series that we have been doing under the MineTech acceleration phase and program as well. So today's session, we're going to be talking about green mining, ESG, waste valorization, and the circular economy. And today we're going to be guided by Momo, who is the entrepreneurship manager at Bongo Hive. And I think she'll be able to introduce our panelists for today.
All right. Thank you so much, Mariah. Please just confirm that you're able to hear me and see me before I get started.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, perfect. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Once again, welcome to the final session of our three-part mining webinar series. And before I introduce our speakers for today, our panelists for today, I'd like to just run us through the journey that we've been so far. So for those that are joining us for the first time, I know there's some on the Zoom call, there's some on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on our other social media platforms. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, this webinar is a series. This webinar series is the public-facing arm of our accelerator program, and it's a partnership between UNDP, NISIR, and facilitated by Bongo Hive. So over the past couple of months, we've been working with a cohort of 10 incredible African startups that are developing solutions for the mining sector, tech solutions for the mining sector. And we've been providing them with mentorship, technical resources, and funding to also scale their innovations. So we designed this three-part series to follow the life cycle of a modern mining venture. So that goes from funding to operation to sustainability. Our first session began in October, and this was focused on capital. So we started by tackling money first. And in our first session that was called Unlocking Investment, we navigated the complex African MineTech funding landscape. We looked at what investors look for in 2025, and the current funding trends and how startups can position themselves to ensure and secure the critical early stage capital. Our second webinar was in November, and this one was focused on operations. And the title of that session was From Pit to Port. It was a technical masterclass, and we moved beyond the buzzwords, and we looked at practical use cases of technology in the mining value chain, how automation is improving safety, optimizing extraction, and also solving the unique infrastructure challenges of the African mining context. So this brings us to today. Now we're focusing on the future. Investment and technology are useless without a social license to operate. So today we discuss green mining, ESG, waste valorization, and the circular economy. So we're here to answer, how do we build a business model that is profitable, circular, and also socially responsible? And to help us unpack this really amazing topic, we have two distinct regional voices. So I'll start by introducing Mr. Bandi Mbubi. Bandi is an executive director of the Fair Cobalt Alliance. He brings over a decade of experience in the sector, notably founding the Congo Calling campaign, which he led for 10 years. He's a specialist in the social dimension of ESG, and he's responsible for sourcing, and with deep expertise in the 3 T's, tin, tantalum, and tungsten, and gold sectors. So I'd like Mr. Bandi Mbubi to just unmute, say a quick hi to our audience for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, and thank you, Momo, for the introduction.
Thank you so much. All right, so our second guest for today is Ms. Bezawit Eshetu. Bezawit joins us to provide a critical East African perspective. While Southern Africa is often characterized by private sector heavy extraction, Bezawit brings insights from a region where the sector is largely government-led. She's a policy expert focusing on urban mining and e-waste, and she works closely with the African Mining Development Center on creating circular value chains that ensure resources actually benefit local economies. Bezawi, thank you so much for joining us. So excited to hear about your work and all your insights that you'll be sharing today. Please feel free to unmute and
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much for inviting us, and look forward for engaging conversations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to both speakers. So without any more delay, we will get started and jump right into the questions so that we can leave enough time for our guests and our viewers to also engage with the panelists and ask some questions. So for those of you that are on the call, please ensure that you keep yourself on mute unless you are asked to speak. Feel free to share your questions in the chat. For those of you that are on the Zoom call, for those of you that are watching us on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and our other social media platforms, please feel free to drop your questions as well and interact. And my colleague Mariah will be able to help us with the questions at the end of this webinar. So our first question goes to both our panelists, just so that we can have a bit of an introduction and just starting broad before we go in deeper into the conversation. So I'm sure we all know, often green mining is dismissed as just PR or greenwashing. So from where you sit, and I'll start with Ms. Bezawit, from where you sit, what does a truly sustainable mining ecosystem actually look like in Africa right now? Practically, and also from your experience, is it a reality or is just an ambition that we have? Where do we stand? How far are we from the ideal that we want to see in the world and in our continent?
Thank you so much, Mama, again. So as you have already mentioned, the East Africa region is not traditionally considered as dependent on extractive industries, but that sector is actually emerging in that part of the continent for quite a number of reasons. Obviously, for employment creation, increasing the number of revenues that will be generated from specific kinds of gemstones, for example, and other related material minerals. But the process is led by government. It is mostly used for attracting investors coming from outside. Of course, there are some domestic ones, but it is mostly government-led. So there are opportunities for existing and then also emerging ones to introduce regulatory frameworks which are more sustainable, I would say. For example, the use of ecosystem payments for extracting water and unlimited water extraction. Yes, it comes with a cost. A lot of investors don't want to do the extra mile of paying for this kind of expenses, but it is mandatory these days. The other one, which is really also becoming a mandatory thing, is quantifying the environmental footprints. The ESG is no longer for getting bank loans, but it should be monetized and quantified, and quality data frameworks is expected from the reports. Before, it was not, as long as you have a feasible environmental impact assessment, which says this is a safe thing to do, these days it is becoming mandatory to include those figures and data. And third, and most importantly, obviously, the land that is going to use to extract those resources, it is a community space. It is a public-owned space, and which is supposed to be used by the communities. So the level of awareness of communities and engaging and demanding their rights to be done in a sustainable way is increasing. You can see a number of mines are now expected to converse with the communities, explaining we're not just here to dig up the resources and leave, but we're also here to create a win-win solution for all of us. So those are the three key emerging trends I'd see in both East and West and North and South, the whole continent, I would say. Back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Bezawit, for that overview. So we talked about community engagement, quantifying environmental footprint, and also water extraction as well. So to move on to a different perspective, Mr. Vandi, please go ahead and also share from your perspective, what do you think about where we are in terms of what does sustainability truly mean for the mining ecosystem in Africa right now? What do you see from your perspective?
Okay, my perspective is actually shaped by my experience of working with artisanal miners in the DRC. I would not want to use the experience of the DRC as representative of the whole of Africa. And as we all know, Africa is not a country, it's a continent. And we have different realities, whether you are in Congo and even across the border in Zambia, or if you are in Botswana or South Africa or Ghana. Realities are different and they are shaped by the context of each country, its own pace of development, its own engagement with communities, mining communities, and wider communities. So when I speak, some people might cringe because the experience in Congo may not be representative across Africa, but that's just part of our realities as Africans. We all the same, but we also all different. And the two can coexist. That's the paradox of being an African person. Now, for the Congo, we have a novel reliance on artisanal mining, especially in Eastern Congo. In Eastern Congo, in order to extract those 3 T's that you were talking about in terms of the work I did before, tantalum, tungsten, and tin, you really do it through artisanal miners. But there is always that dichotomy between all this glossy literature that we see about sustainability and the reality of the people on the ground. It's almost like, yes, let's get green technology, but everybody forgets about the people who are extracting those minerals in Eastern DRC. But even for the for Congo itself, realities are also different. If you are in Eastern Congo, that would be the reality. But if you are in Southern Congo, in Katanga, the provinces of Katanga, Lualaba in particular, and Okatanga, the reality is also different because thankfully in Katanga, there is no armed conflict. You have effectively mining communities, and then you also have industrial mining on a large scale. And that has been part of mining in Southern Congo for decades. And people would even claim throughout the modern state of the DRC. But alongside that, you have artisanal miners, people who are trying to get a living out of mining. And these are people who, sometimes people dismiss them because for many industrial companies, they look at them as disruptors. You know, we have our licenses, the government has given us these concessions, and these little people are coming to encroach on our property. So there is always a tension, a conflict between what maybe industrial companies will look at their property and the right to exploit that. And also, they have the legitimacy to say, look, we are paying taxes, and the government ought to be looking after the people. But from the perspective of the citizens, those people who are seeing the industrial operations that are happening on their doorstep. And remember, mining often happens near houses, near schools, near hospitals. And with the impact on not just the environment, but on the population immediately, not ahead in the future, but the impact is felt almost immediately. So from the perspective of Fair Cobalt Alliance, we think that communities should not be left to their own device. Communities have to be worked with so that we can get them professionalized, formalized, so that we can work with them so that they can find better ways of keeping themselves safe, so that we don't end up having children in mining sites, so that there are rules that underpins their operations. Because we know that the consequences of leaving people to their own device it can be catastrophic. Very recently, we've had dozens of people losing their lives because they were mining, and then the hill collapsed, and dozens of people died. So artisanal mining can be dangerous, but it also can be a safe way of earning a decent income. And if you are born in Katanga, you have the right to extract the minerals that your ancestors left for you. It's your God-given right to have a claim to this, to have a share to that wealth. So what we're trying to do is to work with artisanal miners to give them the tools to help them have the governance that they need in order to trade on the international markets and have a share of the value chain. So that's basically my perspective on it.
Yes, thank you so much, Bandi, for one, reminding us that, Africa is not just one country, but a whole continent that has different perspectives, right? And different realities that are shaped by different contexts. And also just by highlighting some of the things as well that some of the artisanal miners, the miners going through in Congo, and some of the tensions as well that are faced between the industrial miners, the artisanal miners as well. And also just the work that Fair Cobalt does as well to ensure that, the small scale miners, the artisanal miners, which are the majority as well in other African countries as well. I think same thing here as well, right? To ensure that they also have a share, right? As you put it, to their God-given right to have a claim, on their share of the wealth in the country. Thank you so much to both, for setting this stage for us. Ms. Bezawit, I will come back to you with our second question. Again, still sticking to the regional context again before we go a bit deeper. So while Southern Africa is heavy on traditional extraction, so talking about the pit, East Africa is more government-led, as I mentioned, and as you also mentioned in the beginning, right? And it is also focused on different value chains. So can you please explain to us what that dynamic looks like? So just help us paint that picture. And then also, how does the concept of mining change when we look at your region as compared to, Southern and, other regions in the continent?
Thank you again. If you look at the value chain of these extractive industries, even though the resources, the natural capital and resources are it's from Africa, when you actually look for the entry points for Africans to benefit from this resource, it's either at the beginning, extracting it and exporting the raw material, like crude raw material, or at the end. At the end, meaning it gets processed through a long value chain and comes back as a mobile phone, as an electric vehicle battery, or even a solar panel. We come at the end of the users, I would say, at the end of the downstream market. So for me, investing in the initial green technologies for attracting green extractive mining processes it is still an expensive venture, especially for private sectors or domestic market owners in the continent. So at the end of the day, it ends up being a joint venture from elsewhere. But the rule of law, the continent's rule of law applies as any other opportunities. It is in the hands of Africans, in my view, to make sure that the investments coming from abroad, the joint ventures, push and make sure and that it is the investment which is really to the benefit of the natural capital's utilization in terms of greening, in terms of creating the number of jobs, for specifically training the human capital in the continent, because we can't continue using artisan skills, which is a very minimum, compared to using a larger scale materials in equipments and even technology-wise. Otherwise, we will be again the labor force, not the technical mind to do the actual extraction. That is one. And number two, going one more step from the extraction only, like processing semi-processed, semi-precious metals, which are really processed halfway, it's something which is emerging. Before a couple of years, I am from Ethiopia. So before a couple of years, we had opal in the northern part of the country. So it's just extracted and the crude material is just sent elsewhere to be polished and processed and come back to us as a material, as a jewelry. But that has stopped. At least semi-processed materials can be exported, and the revenue generated will be a little bit higher. So building that capital is something that we also need to work. I just gave an example of opal, but in countries where you have a major mineral resources, it is a skill that needs to be developed. The universities should be on board. The private sector should make sure that the young entrepreneur, the young workers are not just there to dig the materials, but to make sure that they are also part of the technology users, adopters. So when you come to the other end of the downstream market, urban mining is also becoming an emerging topic. We are resource recovery facilities for e-waste is increasing. Well, the coastal countries, for example, in Mombasa, where you have direct access for Ghana, Accra, for example, the waste that's coming through those seaports is high. And of course, the others which are landlocked, we just have to wait until it comes as a second hand to the continent. But regardless of where the resources comes, e-waste is becoming an emerging topic for the continent to be addressed. But it also have an opportunity. It's an opportunity to develop a facility for extracting those recovery materials. It's an opportunity to develop business models, circular business models, and to validate them within the continent. There's an opportunity also to support innovations that design modular kind of e-waste. Instead of just extracting the end, you can design them in such a way that they don't end up being e-waste in the first place. Another really emerging topic here is a lot of countries are switching to electric vehicles. It is good, but again, we're the ones exporting the raw materials, especially the precious metals used to develop the batteries. But at the end of the day, there is a lifetime, a limited lifetime for those batteries. So setting up such facilities to extract the resources and reuse them is something that is also emerging. Africa is becoming rapidly an urbanizing continent. Construction is booming here and there, but also the lifetime of those buildings is limited. But if we manage to build them in a sustainable way, there is an opportunity to really minimize our carbon footprint. Instead of extracting steel endlessly, we have the opportunity to use the secondary materials, replace them with recycled construction materials. So those are the really emerging sectors that mining is now really linked with. You really don't have to continue mining iron ores or steel. when you could use reused material from the construction, demolished sites and things like that. So those are the emerging topics: construction material waste, electronic waste vehicles, which are considered basically in general e-waste materials. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Bezoid, for that, for going in depth on there and just highlighting some of those opportunities as well. And we are working with a number of founders, innovators. So I do hope that they were taking note on some of those opportunities that they can also take advantage of on the continent. Thank you so much. Moving back to you, Bandi, let's now talk about the human element, which you're really involved in. So when we talk about ESG, the E, which stands for environment, for maybe some people that have joined the conversation late, let's get a lot that usually gets a lot of attention, especially in this space that we're in. But you've spent 10 years championing the S, so which stands for social. Why is the social license to operate no longer just a nice to have, but a requirement for profitability? Why should companies think about it, care about it, and how does it actually contribute, right, to even their bottom line, which some of them may think otherwise?
Yeah. The interesting thing about the S, and you're right, Momo, that the S is often forgotten, but people tend to focus on the E. I can understand why people focus on the E, because the E will also affect the S. But the S, why do we always have to start with people? Because for many operations, mining operations, the disruptions often don't come from the environment. The disruption often come from people. People blockading roads, resisting to mining operations. Because any company worth its while should not lose the social license. And the social license comes from the people, the communities. So how can you ignore people? Because, you know, as I was saying earlier, mining often happens near schools, near where people are living. And if you lose their interest, that's it. You're gonna have problems on your doorstep, and you're not going to be able to operate. So social license is always important. You have to have social license from the very people who are hosting you. So that's why for any startup, think about the social impact. Think about how is that going to be affecting the local population? How are you going to get the buy-in? Because if you don't have the buy-in, then it's going to be difficult to operate. It's also going to be difficult to even recruit, because remember, you might be thinking about engineers, trucks, and all those things, but you also have to think about laborers who may not be as highly skilled as the people that you think you should be bringing in, but they matter. So you've got to think about the S, and that's important. But I will go on from what I'm saying about how important it is to bring in communities to also explain something positive that the DRC government is now doing, which is that they are now recognizing the fact that we have high unemployment in the DRC. And we also have people, because of poverty, who want to get into mining. If you leave it to their own device, it's dangerous. It's dangerous for the environment because they're going to just, dig without any concern for the environment. It's dangerous for themselves because they're not going to be protected. It's dangerous for the economy because, they're going to be ripped off, be selling, the materials at very low cost when actually they can be making a decent living. So what the Congolese government has now tried to do is they now have put in place 64 designated areas where artisanal mining can take place. So, you have places where artisanal mining can take place, but it has to follow norms. You don't just do it anyhow, but you follow norms. It has to be professionalized, very organized and formalized. And then through that, people can earn a decent living, but also participate in the value chain. So it's not all negative, and there might be entrepreneurs who might tap into these opportunities, things that maybe before were not always talked about very openly. So it's an innovative manner to not look at ordinary citizens as a problem, but to use them as an opportunity for their own sake, but also for the development of the country.
Thank you so much for that, Bandi. I think earlier you mentioned something about working with people and the communities, and I think that was a very brilliant example from the Congolese government that you've highlighted on how rather than fighting what's going on, they use it as an opportunity to also just work with the community and give them an opportunity to also earn an income. So I'll stay with you on my second question, and I'd like for us to talk a bit more about the ASM and the supply chains as well that they work in. So you work at the intersection of local artisanal miners and also the massive global buyers like Tesla, Google, that also buys some of these raw materials. The narrative around ASM is often negative, as you've pointed out, right? That tension between the bigger players and the smaller players. So how do we dignify and formalize this sector? I think you talked about earlier, you mentioned about that it's the God-given right, to make a claim on that. That's how they also, get out of poverty as well. So it does contribute to the larger ecosystem. But maybe you could talk a bit more about how, or the work that you do to dignify and formalize this sector. And also what role does ethical sourcing play in ensuring that African communities actually benefit from the minerals leaving their ground as well? So if you could just talk about those two, and then we can move on to Spezavit.
Yeah. Downstream companies, technology companies, want to account for their raw materials. They want to make sure that whatever they produce is not tainted, but by something that has killed a child somewhere in Africa. They want to account for it, which is a good thing. When some of us started to do the campaign on ethical sourcing, and that this was back in 2010, 2012, many technology companies were irresponsible, to be frank. They were saying, well, actually, we can't account for our materials. We don't know where it's coming from. By the time we're using the material, it's already been mixed, so we don't know. But there's been a change, from when we first started campaigning on responsible mining, responsible sourcing. Things have changed. Now, downstream companies are readily telling people how they can account for the raw materials, which is a big change and it's a positive step. But we also know that artisanally produced material is still ending up in their supply chains, and sometimes they don't know how to account for it. Now, with Fair Cobalt Alliance, what we have put in place is a pilot site where we have worked with mining communities. We've worked with a cooperative. A cooperative, for those of you who don't know, is like a syndicate of miners coming together and organizing themselves in terms of how they are not only extracting, but also how they're trading with companies that buy their materials. So that's a cooperative in the context of Congo. Now, we have worked with a cooperative, CMDS, in Kamilombe, It's a town in Lualaba called Kamilombe. So we've worked with them and we've professionalized them. So we've worked on their health and safety. So from having dozens of people dying almost every 2 months to having most of the time no fatality. So we have improved their health and safety. We've also made sure that we have no child labor. And sometimes there could be, but we have a hub that can then work with whoever is found as a child in the mining site so that their situation is remediated. So we're not just saying, no child here, but if we find you, we try to see whether we can help you so that you don't come back. So there is that. And then there is also a program about economic resilience for people to maybe save money and also to look for alternative ways of living. Because sometimes people feel like they don't have a choice. Sometimes people want to be an entrepreneur, but there is no money, no access to capital. So we've put in place money that people can borrow, can save, and that helps the community. Now, in addition to that, what we've also done now this time, because we've been able to, because all those problems cannot be addressed by one single entity. So our model is really bringing together downstream companies as well as mining companies and local civil society organizations and leaders, bringing them together in order to solve the problem. And part of that for downstream companies is really that recognizing the fact that you can't account for everything in your supply chain. What some of them have now done is supporting initiative like Fair Cobalt Alliance, so that they don't wash their hands off. They don't say, oh, well, we only deal with industrial mining and they can account for everything in the supply chain. But recognizing that even if you did that, artisanal mining is the reality for many of those places. And therefore, we have to do something about it, because the more we help them formalize, the more we help them professionalize, the better it is for them, for the environment, and for us. So as a global community, we win, everybody wins. And another mechanism that we've put in place is for downstream companies to be able to buy what we call cobalt credit or mineral credit. So yes, you can account for everything in your supply chain, but you invest in those communities that are mining so that once they get the money, they can invest in their community. They can decide how they can use that money. So that's an innovative way that we've worked around those issues, and I'm grateful to all those companies that have been part of Fair Cobalt Alliance and have been working with us to make sure that they don't wash off their hands, but they really tackle the issues and roll up their sleeves and say, well, we're gonna make these things happen. And that's the beauty of what we've done as Fair Cobalt Alliance.
Thank you so much for sharing those amazing examples. I've even already identified some areas where some of the startups we're working with actually, could play a role or opportunities for them. So thank you so much for sharing. We'll definitely be talking a bit more on that after the webinar. So I'll move on again to Ms. Bezawit. And we're going to go back to now talk about waste valorization. You did briefly give some examples and talk about circular economy in the mining value chain, but I'd like for you to, I think, maybe go a bit deeper as well with some real life examples that you've worked in. So one of our key themes today is waste valorization, and it's about turning liabilities into assets. So are there any real world examples that you can share with us that you have seen where waste, for example, tailings, slag, or e-waste as well? I think you talked about electronic cars and earlier. So do you have any real world examples where that type of waste has been successfully turned into a revenue stream in your region, in mines that you've worked around, so that we can give some inspiration to some of our innovators. Yeah.
I understand. Yes, let me start with what is actually really that's going to drive the whole process. I'll start with the enabling legislative frameworks that are already there to encourage this kind of interventions or entrepreneurship, joint ventures or initiatives. It starts with the government having a value chain or consumer or a production system where the markets are driven by the consumers requesting for a sustainable products and services to be availed to them in the market. But that comes with an expense. The more high-end sustainable product that we are requesting, the higher the cost of that. And it comes with the request saying the production cost is high. Who is going to absorb the cost of investment or even the operational cost and the capex that is required, the initial capital that is required to set up those sustainable production sites. So that is where regulations like extended producer responsibility, green public procurements that are mandatory comes in. You also have other regenerative systems, for example, extended ecosystem payments, ecosystem service payments. So those companies can find a business model where they can actually invest in those additional costs that they're going to incur by using this kind of schemes, financial schemes. So once you have those strong financial incentives and schemes in place, then you'll have businesses that can adopt and even co-design circularity practices, because there will be tax breaks that will support them. There will be a system that will ensure that their products, no matter how much expensive they are, will be paid. The difference will be paid by some entity. It could be the cost could be turned into to the consumer or to the producers themselves. But in any case, having those procurements in place, policies and regulations in place, has worked. For example, EPR schemes for e-waste has worked in quite a number of countries like South Africa, where you could trace each and every electronics coming to the continent to be traced back to the producers. And that is supported by companies like bilateral partners like ITU, International Telecommunication Union, UNIDO, who's promoting resource efficiency and cleaner production. There are regional initiatives because the economy of scale also matters. Setting up a high-end US facility for one country versus a regional context works, and that's happening with We Center in Kenya, for example, where they collect e-waste from different parts of the region and process it in one central area where the economy of scale will make financial feasible sense. And then the other thing is technology. Technology, it's a two-way street. It's about building the capacity of the designers within the country. Most of them, unfortunately, are not real full-fledged manufacturers, but assembly stations. So there is an option of making sure that all the modular components of the cars or the mobile phones or the laptops that are going to be assembled within the continent could be designed in such a way that they are modular. So at the end of their life cycle, it will be dismantled back into something that is going to be used down the lane. That has also been tested in countries like Nigeria, and it has worked. Well, for quite a number of reasons. One, because the government is investing on this kind of modular assembly lines. It has also worked in Ethiopia because the country is introducing a zero carbon emission electric or vehicle transportation system, e-mobility, that's what they call it. So in that case, incentives will be given to companies who are assembling public transportation buses with a zero tax break. That is an incentive that has worked. It's quite new, but it has worked. So those kind of incentives has worked, and innovation supports has worked. But looking at what circular economy could mean, it is an ecosystem thinking process. It comes with the whole process. We might not be able to have a hands-on control of the mining sites or the quarry sites, but we do have the opportunity of engaging the communities once the quarry sites are dug and everything is gone, because minerals are finite resources. They don't regenerate, but the land is still there. So you can reclaim the land using nature-based solutions to mimic solutions which will reclaim the land, and the land goes back to the community. So those are something that has worked with reclaiming brownfield lands, which were lost through this kind of systems. The other one is the innovation, the entrepreneurships, which are working on circular business models. For example, using service-based products as a service instead of really going all the way from extraction to manufacturing and then using and then dumping it, and not waste valorization, but really using a system where the product is service, not you buy the service, not the product itself. So instead of going all the way from manufacturing a laptop, you could use a system where you have a co-working space, but so people can really access those resources. It's a business model that's working with rural communities, for example. Not so many people own laptops, but they go to a co-working space and access that resources. So instead of buying 10 laptops, you have 2 laptops, which could be shared with 5 people. That is minimizing in terms of circular economy. It might not be much, but when you look at the economy of scale, if that can be done in a larger scale, we are minimizing the extraction rate. Well, you can't stop the extraction for obvious reasons, but we can minimize it. That is reducing the extraction rate. So those are the business models that are working in the continent in different forms and initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bezawit. I think you shared so many examples that we can take advantage of and look into. But most importantly, you've highlighted how this needs to be an ecosystem effort first, and starting with government policies and regulations that help to support both sides, right? So yeah, thank you so much for that. Mr. Bandi, would you like to add on maybe any examples that you've also seen in the space that you're working with, if any?
I'm afraid I'm a bit envious, Bezawit, about the evolution that you have been able to achieve in terms of waste valorization. Very envious, because from what I've seen, at least in the DRC, because maybe the natural resources are so abundant, everybody goes into a full production mode, and I think there is little thinking about waste. But there is also an opportunity, perhaps, for very innovative entrepreneurs to be thinking about waste, because if you go to mining communities, you'll see, you won't be even be told about waste. You will be seeing it with your naked eyes. You will see hills and hills of waste. Tailings are there, but no one is necessarily exploiting them. But obviously, as an entrepreneur, that's something to tap into. Because in waste, you always have things, you still have minerals inside, things that were not properly extracted. So that's a business opportunity for those entrepreneurs that have a vision for not just extracting minerals, but also innovating the way mining is done. So I can only applaud what you've been able to do in Ethiopia and the wider region of East Africa, including Kenya. But I'm afraid in the DRC, we're still grappling with how do you extract more safely minerals. Less thinking is done to how do you valorize waste.
All right, thank you so much. I will stick with you, Mr. Bundy, on our next question when we're almost wrapping up. So for those of you that are either in the Zoom call or on our other social media platforms, please feel free to start posting your questions so that we can get right into it after our last couple of questions. So now we're moving into a bit of technology for you. So for tech startups, so the program that we're running, MineTech, was focused on leveraging technology to provide solutions for the mining sector. So for some of the startups that may be listening, some of the startups, the innovators, we hear a lot about blockchain and traceability, and I think was also briefly mentioned as well a bit earlier. So from your view, what technology gaps still exist, and also what tools do you wish you had to make ethical sourcing easier or more transparent, especially that is something that is still quite a challenge in your area and field of work?
Okay, so blockchain can be useful because you can actually, through blockchain, be able to trace to where you were able to extract minerals, and then make sure that nothing gets inside. But there's a challenge. There's a challenge, especially for artisanal miners, because some places you don't necessarily have the signal, let's say, to your mobile. How do you do that? So that poses a challenge. But the challenge can be overcome because you can still also be able to create apps that maybe don't necessarily have to rely on a signal working in a place where you're extracting minerals. The other challenge, which is actually is not a challenge in itself, but there has to be thinking about linking the price, let's say, on the stock exchange with how much artisanal miners are able to get. Almost how you have it with coffee, so if you're a laborer or at least if you're a farmer in Cote d'Ivoire, you might be able to tell how much this cocoa that I'm planting here is going to be sold on the stock exchange. And you can actually work out more or less how that's going to work out. We don't have a system like that, unfortunately. And that's really an opportunity for a lot of our entrepreneurs who can look into blockchain, true, but also innovative ways of using technology for, obviously, I'm biased because my perspective is shaped by artisanal miners. I'm looking for how artisanal miners can professionalize, how they can make a greater income, how they can have greater value in the value chain, and they, some smart entrepreneur out there listening to me might find a way to help those miners to work out and to have the ability to negotiate that. But also there is a responsibility for governments as well, because as Bezawit was explaining, you need to have good governance. You need to have places where those prices can be negotiated, because if you are an ordinary citizen or an ordinary cooperative, you may not have the political power to be able, or even the market power to be able to exert that influence. So there needs to be some gathering of forces to be able to bring that about. But smart entrepreneurs, that's what they tend to do. They tend to not just look at one dimension, they tend to look at different dimensions. They tend to work with the local authorities, they tend to look at the central government, they tend to look at the market forces, and that's how great innovation comes about. It doesn't come about in isolation. It always comes about as looking at the ecosystem. So blockchain, yes, technology, yes, but it has to work for people. People have to be at the center of everything that we are doing. Otherwise, it's greenwashing, and it doesn't really make any difference.
All right, thank you so much. We will then end, I think, with Bezawit. I think we'll move into integrating ESG, especially for early stage founders, who are really the primary people that we are working with through this program. And I'll come back to you, Mr. Bandi, as well, in case you would like to add on. But Bezawit, would be good to know from your perspective. Many early stage founders think ESG is something you worry about after you make a profit. And I think this is something Bandi also talked about just now. So why is this a dangerous mindset for an African MineTech startup in 2025 and beyond? I think working with a number of startups in any sector, these are things that we talk about, but we also have to be cognizant, as you mentioned earlier, that there's also this conversation around who pays for, the additional costs and things like that. So, sometimes, maybe business development service providers and some of us who help, sometimes you're focusing more on the profit, and then using the profit, you can then come back and start to think about, the E and the S part, right? But that doesn't always work out. And sometimes before you even get to the E and S part, you get into challenges. So what should we, practically, what can we do to support these early stage founders? What do we tell them? How do we encourage them to think about it earlier on rather than as a byproduct of what they're doing?
Well, in an era where the consumers are really driving or attracting the market, instead of low-cost operational cost, it is the cost of inaction is very high for producers. People are now obliged, honestly, to explore these evolving considerations of ethical production, consumer resource efficient and cleaner production patterns, that it is no longer about reducing their cost of production and maximizing their profit margins, but it is about attracting the right market niche and the right value for their products and services. So in grounding these principles, it's not only risking regulatory penalties within their respective governments or outside if they're exporting, for example, or creating reputational damage, but it jeopardizes the long-term success of whatever business they're building. And they're also the opportunity of them attracting new marketplaces and the resilience in the end, because they have to be able to generate the income on a long-term basis. But most importantly, they will lose their trust with their stakeholders, both with the ones providing them the raw materials, because they know it's not going to be used in a sustainable way. They start asking, why is it not used in the right way? But also on the customer side, because people will start asking, how far did the environment how far was the environment destroyed for me to have this material? So it is about creating a sustainable product line along the value chain for a longer time in a resilient market. The first line is obviously building public-private partnerships, because at the end of the day, the land where you have the original capital, natural capital, belongs to the government in most instances in African countries and the community. Public is the most important partner, but the private sector, especially in countries where there are conglomerate producers, it's much easier to convince them to change their way of doing in a shorter period of time than going through the larger public processes. So creating that public-private partnership and modality would support fast-tracking the whole process. As I said, startups can focus, mostly they are focused on the end, at the downstream market where the waste is generated, and it's about treating the waste, end of pipeline treatment.
but I believe they also have a good role at the beginning of designing the product itself, especially with the young graduates and young entrepreneurs with brilliant ideas. So it's much better to focus on both partners, on both parts of the value chain.
Thank you for sharing. And I think from what I've got from you, I think we can summarize it by just saying that it's no longer, a conversation or something that we can ignore.
Yeah.
It's really just part of, how we are doing business now and how we're supposed to do business. So thank you so much for that. And Bandi, would you like to also add on?
Yes, definitely. I think compliance with the regulations is not an option. It is a must, because if you don't comply, then your buyers are going to be reluctant to buy your product in the first place. But then consumers are also now much more considerate of environmental damage, how any product you're producing has damaged the environment, and what you've been able to do to prevent that, or to even limit, because they would always be an element of environmental damage, but it's the irresponsibility that any consumer would not agree with. So you will be really, you'll be doing yourself a disservice if you were not taking into account governance, complying with regulatory frameworks. And also you'll be doing yourself a disservice if you were not taking into account environmental damage. But then the S that Momo, you highlighted earlier on, is extremely important. You have to have social license to be able to operate in any place you're operating in. Because if you don't have the social license, the government itself is going to find it difficult to work with you. Then you really jeopardizing the success of your business. And B, you're not going to have the goodwill of the local population, even if the government was to back you up. But the local communities will make your business inoperable. So you really always have to think about social license. People have to feel, let's preserve this business here because it benefits us. It's not just benefiting these entrepreneurs, but it's also benefiting us. It's doing something for our community. So you always have to think about community development. I actually like the old-fashioned word CSR, community social responsibility. Okay, corporate social responsibility. How do you make sure that whatever you do is backed by the social, or the community you're operating in, and even beyond? So ESG should not be an add-on. ESG should be at the center of what you do. And if you do that, you would have the, and with your product being innovative, it's gonna, you have a better chance of succeeding.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for closing, and also for just summarizing that ESG should not be an add-on, but at the center of everything you do to increase your chances of succeeding. Thank you so much to Bandi and Bezawit for sharing your insights. We now have about 20 minutes on the clock to just answer any questions that we have from our audience. So it seems our audience on Facebook are more active than the ones here on our Zoom. So I will just read I think there are a couple of comments that we've had from Facebook, and then we have one question. So I'll just read the comments first. So first comment is, recycling solar panels will be our next biggest hurdle, aside from electric vehicle batteries. And this is very insightful. Thank you. So this comes from Mike Lombe on Facebook. I don't know if any of the speakers want to say anything on that. Then next as well is, e-waste recycling is the most sustainable way of recycling and mining minerals, like high quality manganese from batteries, cobalt from gadgets. Innovators and youth entrepreneurs are ready to tap into these industries. I think they just lack resources, so capital and partners. With more platforms offering assistance and guidance like the Timbuktu MineTech Hub, Bongo Hive, we're going to see more solutions in these sectors and a green revolution towards SDGs. This also comes from Mike Lombe on Facebook. So before I ask the question, any comment or any addition to these comments on Facebook? Okay. All right. So yes, please. Would you like to go, Mr. Bani? Yes.
Yes. Look, the waste valorization is very important in addressing the challenges that we're facing as a global community. It's important for us to think about not just the products that we are putting out in the market, but also how the afterlife, what happens after we've used them. And it is true, the solar panel is going to be the challenge of the future. What happens once the solar panel are no longer functioning and you need to get rid of them? How do you use the waste? But I would probably say, well, not probably, I'll say, look, in the same manner, one of the commentators has said, we can now recycle some of the minerals that we've used in the product and put them back into other products. I think innovators, again, entrepreneurs, can think about how can we do that? How can we recycle those solar panels? I don't have a ready answer, but I'm assuming that that's what ought to be the move in terms of actually recycling those devices that we've used and are no longer in use, so that we can have that circularity that we often talk about. But at the same time, the reality is that mining will still need to happen. And because mining will still need to happen, we also have to think about how do we do it safely, not just in terms of improving large-scale mining, but also improving artisanal mining. Because the beauty of artisanal, large-scale mining is that you can do it with big equipment, and then get things out quickly, okay? And then large-scale companies can also pay taxes in a way maybe that artisanal miners are not always able to pay, all right? But if you leave artisanal miners to their own device, without any techniques, and they're still going to do it. So you better as well make sure that you professionalize them, because also you have direct access to income. In a place like the DRC, where unemployment is really high and where the local wage is almost about $3 a day, people are getting 10 times more than that if they do mining. So you have to restore their dignity. So yes, let's by all means do, get something out of the e-waste. True, it has its place, but it's not a be it end all.
Thank you so much for that addition, Wendy. We've got a question here from Anonymous. Quite interesting question. I'm curious to hear how you'll be able to address this. So there was a recent, I would say tragedy, unfortunate event that did take place here in Zambia, but same thing also happened in Congo. You mentioned this in the beginning, right? So our anonymous participant here asks, so regarding the recent pit wall collapse we saw in Zambia, investigations showed that cracks were visible days before. We have startups doing computer vision and drone scanning. So why do you think it is taking so long for this technology to become mandatory? So I think maybe what he's trying to say is that there's technology already on the market to support, right? Some of these issues that are having and to avoid, but it's not mandatory. So why is it taking long? And yeah, what can we do to help while maybe some policies or regulations are being put in place for some of these things. So I'd like to hear maybe perspectives from both speakers. We can start with you, Bandi, since you're already unmuted.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I recently visited a mining site. I won't name names, but I was actually impressed because they were already using that technology. So they can already pick up very quickly if there is any crack or if there is any movement that is suspicious, and quite quickly they can extract miners. They can stop the operations and address the problem. So really, really impressed with how that happens. But again, sometimes what happens is that some mining sites are not always properly monitored. Some mining companies are better than others. We all know that. And those that are better have that system already in place. Others that are irresponsible, are not investing in that kind of technology. And that's why we're still getting those accidents. And it's important that that is remediated and addressed quickly. And government has a role to make sure that that becomes mandatory. But for artisanal miners, it's going to be difficult because it's a different it's a different way of working. And that's why I keep on saying that artisanal mining, yes, but in a way that is responsible. And responsible here means you have to have due regards to safety. You have to have due regard to norms that have to be adhered to. So it's not in a chaotic manner, but in a very organized, formalized, and professional way. And artisanal mines also have the duty to pay their taxes like anybody would do from any income they're making. So as opposed to seeing it as a problem, it has to always be seen as a solution, as an opportunity. Yeah, all for that kind of technology to prevail.
All right, thank you. Vezawit, anything to add from your side?
Yes, mining is one of the chemical intensive activities or sectors, and most of the time it is done by artisans, and the impact, its impact on the GDP is only the one that is recorded along the line. But the impact of those chemicals, environmental impacts, regards, for example, the contamination of soil and water resources, toxicity to the ecosystem like aqua lives and the surrounding land, or human health impacts are never even considered as a big problem to be aired out. Having this kind of applications will not be able to will not only be able to document the grievances from the communities, but also be able to quantify it. How much exactly of the ecosystem is wasted? And information is power. That is the bargaining power of the investors, of the community, to go to the investors or the local authorities to say this much percentage of the land is destroyed because of these chemicals. They might not be chemists, but they will have the at least the basic knowledge of giving the information by collecting information from gathering, compiling information from this kind of data, this kind of technologies that will be compiled by a service provider. That is a job, but that's one business model, by the way, for an entrepreneur, for a startup to work on, because they can sell the data to whoever is interested to pursue this topic. It's just to give one example. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so I see that we do not have any more questions. Mariah, please just confirm for me on maybe any of the other platforms as well.
Yes, currently there's still no more questions coming in.
Okay, all right. I guess everything was loud and clear, and our speakers really just covered everything to everybody's satisfaction. So thank you so much, Bezawi. Thank you, Bandi, so much for your time and all your insights. I'll just recap maybe just some of the key things that were talked about during this webinar for those of you maybe that might have joined late. So our speakers reminded us that the real sustainability isn't just green talk, but it's about measuring our actual impact, managing resources responsibly, and also truly working with communities around mining sites. We also shared powerful insights from DRC, from Bandi, where artisanal miners are often overlooked yet play a huge role, and also why helping them work safely and fairly is key. We also heard how mining looks different across Africa, with East Africa leaning into value addition, urban mining, and circular ideas. A big theme was that the social side of ESG can make or break a mining operation. And if you lose the community, you lose your license to operate even as a whole. And as global buyers push for ethical sourcing, I think this was re-emphasized throughout the webinar by Bezawit. There's a real opening for tech solutions in traceability and also fair pricing. So the speakers also showed how good policies, regional collaboration are helping to turn waste into revenue streams. So for our startups, the message was clear. Don't wait to care about ESG, and building it in early into your business models protects your reputation, opens markets, and also sets you up for long-term success. So that's just a summary of our conversation. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is a webinar, a three-part webinar series. This one on ESG, particularly in circularity, was our last one, but you can listen to all our webinars and this series on our YouTube channel, and it's also on our social media platforms, but we will link to our YouTube channel so that you can watch all of them and just follow the conversation. Once again, I would like to really thank our speakers for your time, for your insights, and also just giving back to the ecosystem. This is the first time that we're tapping into the mining industry. It's new industry. There's so much going on. In previous webinars, we talked about how it's a bit challenging as well. It's a bit of a challenging industry for startups to, get into. So all the support that they can get is really necessary, and our work continues, and people like you who really just come here, share, and give back, very, very much appreciated. So I'd like to thank you once again, and I wish you all the best, and we will be talking to you, I'm sure, in the coming months. Thank you so much. And to everybody that joined us today on all our platforms, thank you for your engagement, for your questions, and for just being with us here today. So I'd like to wish everybody a lovely day, and also enjoy your upcoming weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.